The hospital room was quiet. Too quiet. St. Vincent's Hospital, Los Angeles, 1952. The kind of silence that feels heavy, that presses against your chest, and makes breathing deliberate. Bing Crosby sat in a chair that was too small for him, too uncomfortable, too close to the bed but somehow not close enough. His hand held hers. Small, cold, lifeless. Dixie's hand. The hand that had once held his when they danced at the coconut grove. The hand that had held their newborn sons. The hand that had broken his gin bottles and dragged him to Turkish baths when he was drinking himself to death in the early days. Now it just lay there, pale, unresponsive. She had been in a coma for days. The ovarian cancer had ravaged her body so completely that the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. Surgery had failed. Hope had died before she did. But Bing stayed. For hours. Days. He abandoned everything. Recording sessions, film commitments, radio shows. The man who was never home, who spent months on location, who had moved to Pebble Beach while she lived in Holmby Hills alone with the boys. That man finally came home, and held her hand, and waited. And when she finally took her last breath on November 1st, 1952, 3 days before her 43rd birthday, something inside Bing Crosby broke that would never be whole again. But nobody in that room knew the full story. Nobody knew what that hand-holding meant. Nobody knew it was too late. 22 years too late. To understand what happened in that hospital room, why Bing's vigil broke everyone who witnessed it, why his grief was so devastating, why holding Dixie's hand was both an act of love and an admission of failure, we need to go back. Back to 1930 when Dixie Lee was a star and Bing Crosby was nobody. Back to when she was told not to marry him because he'd never amount to anything. Back to when love was simple and the future felt infinite. Because what broke everyone in that room wasn't just a man losing his wife. It was a man realizing too late what he had already lost years ago. Her real name was Wilma Winifred Wyatt. Born November 4th, 1909, in Harriman, Tennessee. She moved to Chicago, graduated from Senn High School, entered an amateur singing contest as Dixie Carroll in 1928, and won. The prize was a job at the College Inn Roadhouse. A talent scout spotted her, gave her a role in the traveling company of Good News. Fox Film Studio offered a contract but changed her name to Dixie Lee to avoid confusion with actresses Nancy Carroll and Sue Carroll. By 1930, at age 20, she was a rising star, beautiful, talented, witty, full of life. And then she met Bing Crosby at a party at the Coconut Grove. He couldn't take his eyes off her, but she ignored him, or pretended to, let him come to her. When they were finally introduced, something clicked. They started dating. And on September 29, 1930, they married at the Church of the Blessed Sacrament in Hollywood. The Associated Press got his name wrong in the announcement. Dixie Lee, film actress, was married today to Murray Crosby, 26 years old. Orchestra leader. She was the star. He was Murray Crosby. A friend told Dixie, "Don't marry the guy. If you do, you'll probably end up supporting him all of his life. He'll never amount to anything." She married him anyway. 6 months into the marriage, Dixie asked for a divorce. March 4th, 1931. She told the press, "We have only been married about 6 months, but we have already found out that we are not suited for each other. Bing is a fine boy as a friend, but married he and I just cannot be happy." They reconciled a week later. Bing flew to Tijuana, begged her to come back. She did, but something had cracked, and it would only get worse. They had 4 sons, Gary in 1933, twins Dennis and Philip in 1934, Lindsay in 1938, and Bing's career exploded. Radio, records, movies. By 1935, he wasn't Murray Crosby anymore. He was Bing Crosby, the biggest star in the world, more famous than Dixie had ever been. But fame came with a price, and Dixie paid it. Bing was gone, constantly, traveling, recording, filming. He'd leave for months. Dixie would stay home with 4 boys under 6 years old, in a 20-room mansion that felt like a prison. She started drinking, first socially, trying to keep up with Bing, then compulsively trying to fill the emptiness. Bing tried to divorce her twice, once in 1941, again in 1945 when he wanted to marry actress Joan Caulfield. The Catholic Church denied him both times, so he stayed. But he wasn't there. Not really. He moved to his house at Pebble Beach, spent most of his time there, left Dixie alone in Holmby Hills. In January 1945, she was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital with what was officially called a respiratory infection. Whispers said it was an overdose of sleeping pills. Accidental, they said. But Picturegoer magazine suggested her life was in the balance for over a week. Bing accompanied her in the ambulance and stayed by her bedside that night, for one night, and then went back to work. Bing went to Europe for an extended visit. Headlines screamed that the Crosby marriage was strained. They denied it publicly. But in December 1950, Bing did something surprising. He persuaded Dixie to appear on his radio show, her first professional appearance since 1936, and her first ever appearance with him on radio. It was a gesture, a small one, but it was something. In January 1951, Bing moved back into the Holmby Hills home with Dixie. After years at Pebble Beach, he came home. They were trying again, trying to find what they'd lost, trying to be the young lovers from 1930. But then came 1952, a year of illness. Bing was hospitalized and needed surgery. So was Dixie. And then came the diagnosis: ovarian cancer, aggressive, terminal. The doctors performed surgery. It failed. Dixie would have to rely on God and nature, they said. There was nothing more they could do. Bing was filming in Europe. The call came. Dixie was dying. He flew back immediately. When he returned, against medical advice, Dixie got out of her sickbed to meet him at the train station. She shouldn't have been there. She was too weak, too sick, but she went anyway, because her man was coming home. The strain was too much. The next day, she collapsed, and then went into a coma, and that's when Bing Crosby did what he hadn't done in 20 years of marriage. He stayed. He took a room at the hospital so he could be near Dixie all the time. For long hours while she was in possible danger, he sat by her bed while she slept, and held her small hand, and comforted her. And when she awoke, there was her man, the crooner from the coconut grove, seated at her side with a grin and a wry joke to cheer her. But she didn't wake up. Not really. Not in any way that mattered. She went into a deep coma, and all Bing could do was sit there, holding her hand, waiting. The nurses saw it. The doctors saw it. Friends who came to visit saw it. Bing Crosby, the most famous man in the world, the voice of Christmas, the consummate professional who never showed emotion, was breaking. He didn't leave the hospital, didn't go to work, didn't do anything but sit in that chair and hold Dixie's hand. He talked to her, even though she couldn't hear, told her stories, jokes, maybe apologized. We'll never know. What we do know is that the words he would have doubtless given all of his fame and fortune to hear never came from Dixie. She remained in a coma until she died. On November 1st, 1952, her breathing slowed, stopped, and Dixie Lee Crosby, born Wilma Winifred Wyatt, the girl from Tennessee who won a singing contest and married a nobody who became the most famous man in the world, was gone. She was 3 days shy of her 43rd birthday. Bing sat there, still holding her hand, not crying, not making a sound. And then, finally, he let go. November 3rd, 1952. Requiem High Mass at the Church of the Good Shepherd in Beverly Hills. 600 mourners filled the church and spilled into the streets, but nearly 3,000 people came. Bing prayed, and as he prayed, he brushed away tears. It was difficult to see in him the debonair, carefree Bing whom the world knows. He was just another man deeply grieving for a girl who had stuck to him through thick and thin for 22 years. A press photo from that day shows Bing with his head in his hands. Not the composed star, not the professional, just a broken man. The funeral was upset by the media, photographers everywhere, flashing cameras, questions shouted. Dixie couldn't even be buried in peace. 2 weeks later, Bing was back at work, recording, filming, performing. Life goes on, he told a friend. But it didn't. Not really. After Dixie's death, Bing dated models and actresses. Grace Kelly, Inger Stevens, Pat Sheehan, who would later marry his son Dennis in one of Hollywood's most uncomfortable twists. In 1957, he married Katharine Grant, a young actress. They had 3 children, Harry, Mary, Nathaniel. Mary Crosby said years later, "The greatest gift we had was that he was there. He was a better father the second time, more present, more patient, actually home. But he never talked about Dixie. Not really. Not in any deep way. His 4 sons from the first marriage struggled. Alcoholism, depression, failed marriages. Gary wrote Going My Own Way, calling Bing abusive and emotionally unavailable. Lindsay shot himself in 1989. Dennis followed in 1991. Philip defended his father until his death in 2004. But he also admitted Gary got the severest treatment. And Bing? Bing carried the guilt. In interviews in the 1970s, he talked about his failures as a father, said he'd been too strict, too absent, too hard. Lindsay, before his death, said, "I don't know how our dad could feel he's failed us as a father." Reading that he had said that in an interview really shook me up, but the damage was done. The vigil in 1952, holding Dixie's hand, finally being present, finally being the husband she'd needed for 20 years, came too late. In the hospital room in 1952, Bing Crosby held Dixie's hand for hours, days, until she died. It was the most intimate thing he'd done in their entire marriage, and she never knew. That's what broke everyone in that room. Not that he was there, but that he was finally there. After 22 years of being gone, after she'd gotten out of a sickbed to meet him at the train station because she loved him so much, she'd risk her life just to see him come home. He held her hand, but it was empty. She was already gone, not just physically, but emotionally. Years ago, when he moved to Pebble Beach, when he went on location for months, when he tried to divorce her, when he let her drink herself into oblivion while he sang about home to millions of people who would never know he didn't have one. An elderly woman wrote after Dixie was buried, "Movie Town has lost lots of wonderful people, but Dixie was different. It just seemed to me that when Bing or the boys were mentioned or seen about, somehow, I can't explain it, you felt Dixie. You felt Dixie, even when she wasn't there. Even when she was hidden away in a 20-room mansion, drinking alone, raising 4 boys by herself, waiting for a man who was everywhere except where she needed him. And when Bing finally came home, finally held her hand, finally stayed, it was to watch her die." Bing Crosby died on October 14, 1977, on a golf course in Spain. Heart attack. Instant. He was 74. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California, the same cemetery where Dixie had been buried 25 years earlier. In the end, he came home to her. After decades of being gone, he finally came home. But here's the truth nobody wants to say. The vigil in 1952 wasn't about love, not entirely. It was about guilt, about regret, about realizing too late what he'd destroyed in the name of success. Bing Crosby held Dixie's hand in that hospital room, but he'd let go of her years before, when he chose his career over his marriage, when he chose Pebble Beach over Holmby Hills, when he chose fame over family, and when he finally held on, there was nothing left to hold. That's what broke everyone in the room. Not the death, but the waste. The tragedy of a love that died long before the body did. And the man who held her hand, who sat vigil for days, who finally stayed, that man knew it was too late. He knew he was holding a ghost, and he would carry that weight for the rest of his life.